We all want to be happy. It's kind of the whole point, right? But can you actually learn to be happier for good? For a long time, the science was, well, pretty pessimistic about it. But today, we're going to dive into a framework that completely changes the game. For the longest time, scientists looked at lasting happiness like this impossible puzzle. They felt like a few key pieces were just missing. So, what were these big obstacles that made real, durable happiness feel so out of reach? I mean, this is the question researchers were basically asking. Is trying to become happier as pointless as, say, trying to become taller? It sounds a little dramatic, I know, but for a while, the scientific evidence really seemed to be pointing in that discouraging direction. And here are the two main culprits, the two big villains in our story. First, you've got the genetic set point. This is the idea, backed by tons of twin studies, that a huge chunk of your happiness, maybe even 50%, is just baked into your DNA. And then there's the hedonic treadmill. This is our amazing, but also kind of frustrating ability to just get used to things. You get that big promotion, you win the lottery, and yeah, you're ecstatic for a while. But then that just becomes your new normal, and you're right back where you started. But wait, that is not the end of the story. Not even close. A new scientific framework popped up that put these obstacles in their place and gave us a much more optimistic and, more importantly, an actionable path forward. So if it's not all about our genes, and if our life circumstances don't really have the lasting punch we think they do, what's left? What's the secret sauce here? And here it is. This is the answer. This is the model of sustainable happiness that was developed by some brilliant researchers. And what they did was break down our well-being into this super clear, simple pie chart. Okay, let's break this down because it's so important. 50%, that's our genetic set point. Yep, it's a big piece and it's mostly fixed. Then there's this tiny sliver, just 10%. That's determined by our life circumstances. But that leaves a massive 40%. This is the largest chunk we can actually control, and it all comes down to something called intentional activity. Now let's just zoom in on that 10% for a second, because for most of us, this is the most shocking part of the whole model. We spend so much of our lives chasing changes in our circumstances, thinking that is the key to finally being happy. Just 10%. I want you to let that sink in for a second. That's the total impact of all those big life factors on our long-term happiness. It's wild. And look at this list. We're talking about income, getting married, your job status, even where you live. All the things society tells us we should be striving for, they all fall into this teeny tiny slice of the happiness pie. Sure, these things can give you a temporary boost, but they don't sustain it. So why not? Exactly. We just adapt. The novelty wears off, that new car smell fades, and it just becomes your car. The big new salary becomes the new baseline. That's the hedonic treadmill in action, turning these constant circumstances into boring background noise. So if our circumstances aren't the answer, where do we find that real, lasting change? Well, let's turn our attention to the most hopeful, the most powerful part of this whole model. 40%. This is the game changer, folks. This is the portion of our happiness that is completely up for grabs. It's not determined by what happens to us, but by what we choose to do. So what exactly is an intentional activity? Well, the key words here are choose and effort. These aren't passive things. These are things you actively decide to do, whether it's behavioral, like going for a run, or cognitive, like practicing gratitude, or even pursuing a meaningful long-term goal. This quote from the researchers just nails the difference. We can't always control our circumstances, right? But we can always control how we act on them. Think about it. Being married is a circumstance, but actively working to appreciate your partner every day, that's an activity. Okay, but why? Why are these activities so much more powerful than circumstances when it comes to creating happiness that actually sticks around? The science behind this is pretty fascinating. So check this out. This is the hard data. Researchers tracked people's well-being over a long period. And what they found was that, yeah, positive changes in your circumstances, like getting a raise, gave a short-term boost. But that effect completely disappeared over time. But, and this is the key, look at that top path. Positive activity changes led to well-being gains that were actually maintained. The data is crystal clear. Activities are the key to making it last. And here's what it looks like in practice.
These charts show real experiments where people were asked to do simple activities, like performing a few acts of kindness each week or writing down things they were grateful for. And in both cases, you can see these significant jumps in well-being compared to the groups that didn't do anything. It shows that these simple, intentional practices really, really work.
So, why do activities beat that darn hedonic treadmill? Well, it boils down to three main reasons. First, they're episodic. You don't do them 24/7, which keeps them feeling fresh. Second, they're variable. You can always run a different trail or think a different person, which keeps things interesting. And third, they directly fight back against adaptation. By practicing gratitude, for instance, you are literally training your brain not to take your good circumstances for granted. You see, this research doesn't just explain happiness, it hands us a blueprint. It shows that a huge piece of our potential for joy isn't about luck or our genes. It's about conscious, intentional choices. So the only question left is, what's one intentional activity you could start?